Thank you all for joining us for today's webcast, KT 101, Knowledge Translation Initiatives at CIHR. I'm Ann Williams of Seattle in Austin, Texas, and I will be moderating today's webcast. This webcast is offered through the Center on Knowledge Translation for Disability and Rehabilitation Research, or KTDRR, which is funded by the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research, or NIDR, in the U.S. Department of Education. I want to thank my colleague Joanne Starks for her support in coordinating today's webcast. A reminder that we will ask you to complete a brief evaluation at the end of the webcast today, and I'll give you more instructions following the presentation. And you may download a copy of the presentation from our website at www.ktdrr.org. The Center on KTDRR is working with a number of national and international partners, and one of those is the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, or CIHR. You're probably aware of the fact that CIHR, which is the Government of Canada's Health Research Investment Agency, and was first to define and embrace the term knowledge translation, or KT. We're partnering with CIHR's Knowledge Translation Strategy Unit to learn about the innovative KT strategies they are continuing to develop and implement. This webcast on CIHR's KT initiatives is the first in a series of 4 webcasts that also include Ethics in KT, KT and Evidence-Informed Policymaking, and Patient Engagement in KT. Today's webcast will provide an overview of the CIHR Knowledge to Action cycle and the various funding opportunities that have been implemented to advance knowledge translation and lead to improved health through evidence-based practice and care. At CIHR, KT is defined as a dynamic and iterative process that includes synthesis, dissemination, exchange, and ethically sound application of knowledge to improve the health of Canadians, provide more effective health services and products, and strengthen the healthcare system. This process takes place within a complex system of interactions between researchers and knowledge users, which may vary in intensity, complexity, and level of engagement depending on the nature of the research and the findings, as well as the needs of the particular knowledge user. To this end, CIHR funds a suite of funding opportunities that span the KT spectrum. Joining us today are Drs. Alisa Schaefer from CIHR and Neil Cashman from the University of British Columbia. Dr. Alisa Schaefer is currently the Senior Advisor for Knowledge Translation at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. In this capacity, she is focused on analytical measures of knowledge translation and the support of commercialization funding opportunities. Dr. Schaefer received her PhD in 2007 from Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. She was an American Association for the Advancement of Science Policy Fellow at the National Institutes of Health, where she worked on legislative policy, commercialization, and global health matters. Also joining us is Dr. Neil Cashman. He is Professor of Medicine at the University of British Columbia, where he holds the Canada Research Chair in Neurodegeneration and Protein Misfolding Diseases. He has authored over 300 publications, has an H-index of 50, and has more than 10,000 career citations. He was cited by CIHR for the medical milestone of identifying a prion-specific epitope in 2003. He was Scientific Director/CEO of PrionNet Canada, one of the network of centers of excellence, and is founder and Chief Scientific Officer of Amorphix Life Sciences since 2005, a company commercializing his therapeutics and diagnostics in protein misfolding. Dr. Cashman's translational approach to neurodegeneration is exemplified by his 45 patent applications he has filed and the successful licensing of novel therapeutics to Amorphix, Biogen IDEC Corporation, CanGene Corporation, the latter company developing his A-beta oligomer-specific antibody for immunotherapy of Alzheimer's disease. Welcome to both of you. Alisa, are you ready to begin?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Anne, very much for that wonderful introduction. Today, I'm going to talk about knowledge translation initiatives at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And what I'd like to do is provide an overview of CIHR, how we define knowledge translation at CIHR and what it entails, our various research support mechanisms, and some online knowledge translation resources that are available. So CIHR is Canada's health research funding agency, which is very similar to the National Institutes of Health in the United States. CIHR is composed of 13 institutes that span the country from the east to the west, such as the Institute of Genetics at McGill University in Montreal, which would be just north of New York, to the Institute of Neuroscience, Mental Health, and Addiction at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, which would be just north of Washington State. Aside from institutes that fund basic biomedical research, we also have institutes that address Canada's healthcare needs, such as the Institute of Health Services and Policy Research and the Institute of Population and Public Health. CIHR and the institutes support 4 pillars of health research, including basic biomedical research, clinical research, research around healthcare delivery and policy, and the impact of social, cultural, and environmental factors on health. Unlike the NIH, which supports intramural and extramural research, CIHR only funds extramural research and does not have intramural research facilities. Funding for research can be investigator-initiated. Hence, the researcher forms the ideas and sends in an application, or it could meet the need of strategic priorities or gaps in health research and knowledge translation. So in this case, the researcher would apply to a specific funding opportunity. The investigator-driven research comprises about 70% of CIHR's budget. The strategic funding opportunities account for about 30% of CIHR's budget. For example, one of CIHR's major strategic initiatives focuses on patient-oriented research to improve patient outcomes. So what is knowledge translation? How does CIHR support it? And what does it mean to the researcher and the key stakeholders? At CIHR, we define knowledge translation as a dynamic and iterative process that includes synthesis, dissemination, exchange, and ethically sound application of knowledge to improve the health of Canadians, provide more effective health services and products, and strengthen the health care system. In order to achieve this, we expect that researchers engage with key stakeholders that should be part of the research process and that may be impacted by the outcome. So we refer to these key stakeholders that are involved with the research process and outcomes as our knowledge users. For example, if a researcher is looking at developing a drug to treat prostate cancer and she has already shown efficacy in an animal model and is ready to move to clinical testing, this researcher is at the point where she will want to engage some key knowledge users at the appropriate points in time. So she may meet with a biotech company or people at a pharmaceutical firm to assess their interest in developing the compound. So the key stakeholders at the industry side would be considered knowledge users. The patients would also be knowledge users, so she may want to meet with a specific group of patients. These knowledge users should be identified at the point in time when the research project is being designed. So you want to think about your key stakeholders and who your knowledge users are quite early on. So it's not something that comes at the end once the research is done, but it's something that you're really thinking about and working on as you're designing your project. So the knowledge users should be identified and included as knowledge users on the research application. The research design and engagement of knowledge users is part of what we call integrated knowledge translation. Furthermore, how the research findings will be disseminated at the end of the research project is also an important point that needs to be fleshed out with the knowledge users at the point of the research design. So this is all happening quite early on. But the things that happen at the end of the grant are what we deem end-of-grant knowledge translation. And also the dissemination of findings to the knowledge users, such as publications, clinical guidelines, best practices, and having an impact on healthcare and policy would also fall into the end-of-grant knowledge translation activity. So we want to be conscientious of what we do in research, the integrated knowledge translation, the end-of-grant, and who we engage and when. So we want to keep in mind that we want to engage the knowledge user at the appropriate point in time. And when one is working on a project, it's not that we expect the researcher to do everything all along, but it's to do what is appropriate at the right point in time. In order to meet the needs of knowledge translation and researchers, CIHR has several funding mechanisms that support KT across the health research spectrum. I would like to point out, however, that I'm going to be discussing some funding mechanisms that we have used in the past and we plan to fund over the next couple of years. However, we are in the process of streamlining and modernizing our funding mechanisms, and changes to our programs and peer review process are being made. And more of this information can be found on our website. So our KT funding opportunities span the spectrum from basic research, commercialization, and capacity building, as well as planning and dissemination events that could include activities such as engaging with policymakers, patient groups, and not-for-profit organizations. Our planning grants are the preparatory stage of developing a grant proposal where the research team, trainees, and knowledge users come together to develop key aspects of the research plan. So it's really a team that we're funding, and we want to see this team come together and work together. For example, there's a CIHR-funded planning grant that is being used to ascertain what aspects need to be assessed to keep older adults in an assisted living environment versus more supportive, more expensive care. In this case, the research team reviewed the literature. They conducted site visits to the assisted living homes and interviewed the staff in order to develop appropriate implementation strategies for an active lifestyle program across the assisted living sites. And so their goal was to keep the older adults in the assisted living homes and developing a program so that the older adults are active. We also fund dissemination events. We have funding opportunities support events that contribute to the dissemination and exchange of research evidence. And these dissemination events really tie into the end of grant activities. So for example, a CIHR dissemination grant was used to develop a website to inform Canadian patients about ethical issues in medical tourism. So the applicants worked with diverse medical tourism stakeholders and then deemed it was important to disseminate the information about the ethical issues raised by medical tourism. So hence they developed the website. Dissemination events can really span the spectrum of different activities. So it could also entail the education of groups such as patients, health professionals, community organizations, policymakers, and the general public. CIHR supports knowledge synthesis grants that aim to assemble, analyze, and summarize knowledge to inform knowledge users and researchers based on the state of current evidence. So examples would be meta-analyses, practice guidelines, and syntheses. We also have the Knowledge to Action funding opportunities. So the intent of the Knowledge to Action funding opportunities is to accelerate the translation of knowledge by linking researchers and knowledge users to move knowledge into action, and in so doing, increase the understanding of knowledge application through the process. So for example, through a Knowledge to Action grant, CIHR supported RX for Change, which is a searchable database containing current research evidence about intervention strategies used to alter behaviors of health technology prescribing, practice, and use. The intent of this database is to help inform the choice and use of practical, evidence-based interventions. The Partnerships for Health System Improvement is Canada's premier health services and policy research competition, with a strong emphasis on partnerships and knowledge translation. It is a major resource for managers and policymakers who want relevant research to inform their decision-making. So teams are required to come together and also bring in a minimum of 20% of the amount requested from CIHR from the external partner. And the partners can provide cash or in-kind support or in combination of both. So what I really want to highlight with a lot of our Knowledge to Translation funding opportunities is we're focused on partners, on teams, on collaboration. CIHR also supports, we're focused on attracting and retaining the best talent in health research and preparing young researchers for multidisciplinary careers and careers outside of academia. So to meet these criteria, CIHR has several awards that build capacity for promoting knowledge translation. For example, the Science to Business Award encourages individuals with PhDs in a health-related field to pursue an MBA. The Science Policy Fellowship is used to bridge the gap between the worlds of science and policymaking. CIHR also supports doctoral fellowship and new investigator awards. So those are some of the specific knowledge translation mechanisms CIHR supports or has supported. Our Open Operating Grant Program is the largest of the open call for proposals within CIHR's programming to fund health research. So this is really where the researcher sends in a proposal and it's reviewed by different peer review committees. And we can have knowledge translation applications come in through our Open Operating Grant Program. The knowledge translation projects are supported through this investigator-driven scheme, and when appropriate, the applications are assigned to a peer review panel that has KT experts on the panel. I want to take a bit of time to talk about our commercialization funding opportunities. CIHR has several commercialization programs that are part of the KT portfolio, as commercialization is a key component of knowledge translation. To this end, CIHR offers a suite of commercialization initiatives that encourage the capacity of universities and teaching hospitals to interact with partners responsible for delivering the benefits of health research. Now, what I want our audience to keep in mind is that CIHR funds the academic partner through its commercialization programs, which is different, for example, than the Small Business Innovation Research and Technology Transfer Program in the U.S. So in the U.S., the STTR program funds the small businesses, whereas in Canada, CIHR is funding the academic researcher. So for example, with the Industry Partnered Collaborative Research Operating Grants, we provide funding for collaborative research projects involving the academic community and the Canadian industry partners sharing an interest in health, research, and development. The research planned should be beneficial to both parties while improving the quality of health of Canadians. And this type of funding opportunities requires one-to-one matching funds from the industry partner. And also in the States, often with these SBIR and STTR programs, at different phases of those programs, there may be a requirement for matching funds, so that would be a similarity. We have a proof of principle program which provides grant funding to advance discoveries, inventions towards commercializable technologies with a view to attract new investment, create new science-based businesses, organizations, and initiatives, and improve health outcomes. The end product is not required to generate revenue, but there must be a demonstrated market and opportunity for the product. And I think this is also quite similar to the SBIR, SCTR program in the U.S., where really the government is funding the entrepreneurship of these small businesses, but is not always looking for that huge return on investment. So we also have a phase 2 of our proof of principle program, which provides a platform to better enable the academic institutions and researcher to move the discovery further down the innovation pipeline. And it's at phase 2 and not at phase 1, where again CIHR is requesting that there is one-to-one matching funds from the non-academic partner. In Canada, we have several funding agencies, and in order to tie together some of what we do between the different agencies, we use the Collaborative Health Research Projects Program, which is a joint program with our sister agency, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. This program encourages the NSERC and CIHR research communities to collaborate and integrate their expertise and enhances the training of highly qualified personnel in collaborative and interdisciplinary research. So this would be similar to joint funding between the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation in the U.S., where you're really looking to take the biomedical side, the engineering side, the different sciences, and break down the silos and bridge the gaps and really encourage multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary research. And I think we're really moving towards that type of multidisciplinary research type of model. So in this case, with the CHRP program, applicants are required to collaborate with a non-academic knowledge or technology user organization from the private sector, the public sector, or even the voluntary sector that could benefit from the research result. And I want to highlight that the next presentation is one of a CIHR awardee whose projects are really stellar examples of moving research from the lab through the commercialization pipeline to really improve health outcomes for the population. At this time, I want to take a minute to point out some other resources that we have online on our website, and one that may be most appropriate for this audience is the Guide to Knowledge Translation Planning at CIHR, the Integrated and End-of-Grant Approaches. And key components of integrating KT into research planning and reviewing applications is outlined in this guide. And this document is targeted to applicants, to knowledge users, and also to reviewers. So I definitely recommend that people seek out this guide and take a look at it in order to figure out how to really apply for knowledge translation grant and good ways to review it and what is expected of a knowledge user. At this point in time, I will just take a minute to go through some of the other online resources we have, which are listed here on our slides. And then I'd also like to highly encourage the audience to listen to the presentation by Dr. Neil Cashman, who can really showcase the impact on improving lives through effective knowledge translation.
Well, thank you very much, Alisa, for this very informative presentation on knowledge translation initiatives and activities at CIHR.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.